Okay, we're going to get started. Today we're going to talk about, excuse me, part one of Chatichah Neveilah ChaNaN. We're in Siman Beis Sif Gimel Daled, and we'll start as follows. There's a principle of time kicker, which tells us that if you have for example, if you had a piece of chazer would fall into a kosher stew, then the whole thing is usher. Okay, but even though the whole stew is usher, with the piece of pork floating around in it, the whole stew is not considered to be chazer itself. And like, for example, if you had a kazayis of that stew, you would not be getting malchus for that. But Basar B'chalav is different than that. And Basar B'chalav, if I have, the only issur starts when I have basar and chalav mixed together. So when I mix them, if I take basar and chalav and I cook them together, and then I eat that, then I get, for kazayis of that, I get malchus for that, even though there's only some basar and some chalav, not a kazayis of either, but that's okay. The issur is when we mix them together. Okay, so that's in the dinim of time kicker, that Basar B'chalav is obviously different than other Issurim, that the basar and chalav together is what makes the issur. Okay, that comes out in our din, what we're talking about, which is ChaNaN, and it says that what happens if we have that when we mix Basar B'chalav together, milk and meat, cook milk and meat together, they are considered to be complete issur. The what we've made to is issur. And we now, if you want to be mavatal, that we have to mavatal the whole thing. So what do I mean? We have basar and chalav mixed together, an ounce of basar and an ounce of chalav, and it falls into 60 ounces worth of something else. Okay, so now the chalav is batal. The chalav is batal b'shishim. So the basar would also be batal b'shishim. But the basar b'chalav is 2 ounces, so it's not batal b'shishim. Okay, the whole thing is issur. It's not only milk that's usher or meat that's usher. It's the thing together is now it's 2 ounces worth of issur, so it needs to be batal b'shishim. That's
obvious, because of what else would be the issur?
No, what I mean is, as opposed to had a piece of chazer fallen into issur, right, an ounce of chazer and an ounce of heter, and they fell in together, then it's only an ounce of chazer in here. Over here, the 2 ounces together, the Basar B'chalav is the issur together, and therefore, even though we move out to one of them, that wouldn't make a difference. Okay, we have to move out them together. That's Chatichah and Neveilah. Chatichah separately. What do you say? Let's say had you put milk into water first, and it was batal b'shishim, then milk would fall, then meat would fall into it. It would not be usher. Right, it would not be usher. Okay, so that's ChaNaN for Basar B'chalav. That's where the traditional ChaNaN is in Basar B'chalav. Okay, so midaraisa, that's the only case where because in Basar B'chalav the basar and the chalav are each heter, and together they become issur. Okay, so some Rishonim say that in order to avoid confusion from the fact that when we did say ChaNaN, when we don't say ChaNaN, so therefore Chazal said that ChaNaN should apply also to other Issurim as well, not just for Basar B'chalav, but for all Issurim, So for example, if we make a clam beverage, and that beverage is 10% clam and 90% heter, okay? This beverage is only 10% clam. And now that clam beverage is put in 15% that clam beverage is now 15% of a beer formula. Okay, so now the amount of clam in the beer would be batal b'shishim. The amount of clam that's in there is enough to be batal b'shishim. Okay, because it's only the beverage is only 15% of the beer, and the beverage itself is only 10% clam in the first place. Okay, but since we say if we say ChaNaN, then we look at the clam beverage as being 100% issur, and now 100% issur is not batal into the beer because it's 15% of the beer. The beer is not batal. We say ChaNaN, it would not be. Okay, so that's called ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim. I mean, Basar B'chalav is the real case when midaraisa is ChaNaN, and some Rishonim say that midrabanan this is ChaNaN by other Issurim, but are not Basar B'chalav. Okay, so that's what some Rishonim say. The Mechaber follows the sheet of most Rishonim who say that there is no ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim, and ChaNaN it's only ChaNaN by Basar B'chalav. Okay, I'll get to Ramah in 1 second. So okay, I'll tell you the Ramah. But the Ramah says that the minig is to be machmer. The minig is to be machmer and say that you should say ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim, except we'll see in a second in cases of hefsim. So that bear in mind, just the Ramah himself in Teres Chatas, okay, the different statement. The Ramah says even the Ramah is masking. Roy Poskim say you don't say ChaNaN, you only say ChaNaN Basar B'chalav. And most Rishonim hold that it's not that there is no ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim. Even so, he says you should be machmer. We're machmer for ChaNaN, but we'll see that there's lots of kulas to that because we'll only be machmer. only be machmir for these shitas. The Rama says that the makom hefsim ruba you could be sama. Okay, so now before I tell you what that means hefsim ruba, I'll give an example that happened here. Example to bring out a little bit of a question, which is the Machaber says we only say ChaNaN by Basar B'chalav. So there's one pretty well-known shaila is what happens if I have Basar B'chalav that falls into something else? It was skip that. Okay. We had a situation where a company was making marshmallow treats. Okay, marshmallow treats is Rice Krispies. Made with marshmallows, okay, like held together, glued together by a mix of marshmallow and things like that. Okay, the company was making it treif. Okay, so that means they were using real marshmallows, and the marshmallows were made with beef gelatin. So that means these marshmallows were treif because they and the Rice Krispie treats were treif as well. This company also had butter in their recipe. So now the question is that was part of the recipe? Are these Rice Krispie treats, is now the shilas about this thing, is this ChaNaN of Basar B'chalav or is this ChaNaN of Sha'ar Issurim? What's the question? It's Basar B'chalav, right? It's animal gelatin and butter, okay? It's Basar B'chalav. But over here, the animal gelatin is also Neveilah. It's not kosher animal gelatin. It's treif animal gelatin. So
you're saying it's not, and you don't mean a treif species. You're saying it's a Kashrus species.
It's a Neveilah. It's a Neveilah. It's Neveilah.
Okay.
So the I'm sorry, I should be clear. It's Neveilah. So that's a shayl nachronim is the Mechaber's machmir for ChaNaN by Basar says this ChaNaN by Basar B'chalav, but that's because Basar B'chalav both sides are heter before you started. But over here, it was not heter before you started. Here, the Basar side of it was not heter. The Basar was Neveilah. Okay, that's shayla and Taz and Shach talk about it. Where the Basar was Neveilah also. So if the Basar was Neveilah, it wasn't heter and heter coming together to make a new Issur. It's Issur and heter coming together.
Actually, different. It's still Basar B'chalav.
But if we only say ChaNaN when the Chatichah became an Neveilah,
because that shows you that, what are you answering? Obviously, what you're answering is the thing. But the Maisa, you see that like Basar B'chalav. Okay, I mean, I think that's a straightforward shot.
Okay, it's a machlokes. It's a machlokes. So in that case is considered. But
so then what's usher? So they're not saying this Basar B'chalav doesn't apply.
No, it's Basar B'chalav. No, the question of it's ChaNaN.
So okay, so let's say not ChaNaN. So then what's usher?
What do you mean? So what's usher?
What becomes Issur Basar B'chalav? I got butter and I got Neveilah. You say Basar B'chalav applies here. So what's usher in the Issur Basar B'chalav? What is it? On what is the Issur Basar B'chalav chal?
On both of them. On the Basar B'chalav.
Okay,
oh, you said that's Chatichah there. Okay, I don't remember. Okay, so now, so the Rama says that we say, excuse me, Rama says that the makam hefsim ruba we're makel and we don't say ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim. Okay, so two examples of us saying that we're not going to be machmir b'Sha'ar Issurim. The makom hefsim ruba. Two examples of hefsim ruba one was Rebelsky said that anytime a company mislabeled something, okay, they put a symbol onto it that said that the thing is kosher and it really wasn't, and so now you have to think about is should the company do a recall on that product? They put the symbol on it that says that's kosher, but really was not kosher. So now if it was treif, then obviously they have to do a recall. People are eating treif food. If it's kosher, then there's more room to say is, well, maybe we don't have to do a recall because really it's kosher anyhow. So now it's just a question of they did the wrong thing, but people aren't eating treif because of that. So he said, if the only reason why it's treif is because of ChaNaN, okay, you'll think of a situation, and as the thing would be kosher if not for the fact that it's ChaNaN. He says forcing them to do a recall is considered a hefsim ruba. Okay, making the company do a recall is a hefsim ruba. So if the only reason to make this food treif is because of ChaNaN, then you say ChaNaN, but makom hefsim ruba, we don't have to be choshen to ChaNaN.
The hefsim ruba is even if it's paikayim and
that's a separate question. Why that applies to yes, it's correct. It's the same thing. That's a separate question. But yes, it's true. But in the concept, if the concept was forcing them to do recalls considered hefsim ruba, and therefore we would not say ChaNaN b'Sha'ar Issurim in that kind of case.
Even if it's Yidden, you can ask, why does your hefsim ruba allow me to be? Why should I eat it? But the average stuff save you from a hefsim ruba.
Okay, that I'm not sure such a kasha. Okay, I'm not sure if that one's such a question. Okay, another example. Hold on a second. Oops. 1 second, please. I'm sorry. Okay, another example of hefsim ruba was if you have a medicine. If it's a question on a medicine, so we're talking about for a chayla, so then we would not that's equivalent to a hefsem ruba. So what's the example of that? You have a medicine, a liquid medicine, and it's 25% of the medicine is glycerin. Okay, and the glycerin, you don't know, it might be animal based. Okay, well, if it's animal based, then 25% is not going to be batal. So there, Rebelsky said also, he says, if you take the medicine and you dilute it in water or juice or something like that, and you dilute it in every teaspoon in 3 ounces. So if you do the math, you'll find out that there are 6 teaspoons in an ounce. So if we think that of the whole liquid medicine as being Issur, it's only 6 times as much. That's not enough to be batal. But if we say, wait a second, it's only 25% glycerin, the rest of it is kosher ingredients. So then it would have been batal 72 times. Okay, you'll believe me, batal 72 times. And therefore he said, so then to say, if we say ChaNaN, you have to put it in so much more that it's not realistic that your 2-year-old who's screaming and sick is going to drink, a whole bottle of this stuff, right? So he said that's also considered hefsem ruba, and you could be samach that you could be samach. You don't have to be choshen for ChaNaN, and therefore you could be mevatel just in 3 ounces instead of being mevatel in however many more times you would have needed it. Okay. Now there are other studim to be made of it also, but just it's not. It's the treating a choila is the equivalent of a case of hefsem ruba. Just like the hefsem ruba, we wouldn't be choshen. So this is equivalent to that, and we also wouldn't be choshen. Okay. So Taisa says that the typical case, the typical case where Taisa talks about whether she say ChaNaN is when you want to kasher something, which means is if you have a kli, we assume this part is not Taisa, but we assume that there's the contents of a kli is 30 times as much as the volume of the metal of the kli. He says, so if you kasher a kli, the bli that come out is going to make the water treif and make the kli treif again. So Taisa says, if you don't have to worry about ChaNaN, then you can kasher a kli twice, and that's good enough. Why? Because the first time you kasher it, the bli comes out. The bli is batal, we'll say, in 30 times. So now the water that's in this kli, in the kli that you just kasher, is now 1/30th treif. Okay, so it gets reabsorbed. So now the absorption is 1/30th treif. Pour out the water, put in fresh water, and the next time is now batal in 900. Because now 1/30th and another 30 times is in 900. So so even if it was just 8 times, it would have been enough. 8 and 8 would have been 64. So that's if you're choshesh for ChaNaN, that doesn't work because the water is not a 30th treif. The water is 100% treif. And if you're not choshesh for ChaNaN, then you're okay. Okay. For us, in a more that's one example which comes up on occasion. A person will want to kasher something twice as a way of avoiding ein binyamin. But in other cases, like this: if you make in a canning facility, sometimes the only thing that's treif there is pork and beans. Okay, that sounds pretty awful, right? Pork and beans, right? But pork and beans
is the pork part.
Right, pork and beans usually is completely kosher, except for one piece of pork in every can. Okay, that's like a thing. There's one piece in every can, one piece of pork in the can, and let's. How much is the pork in the can? Is it 10%? How many? What percent of the can is the pork? Only a small amount. And or another example. This is a Yossi example. Is we have a company that they make cheese. And they cook their mozzarella cheese, and they make end up with something called cooked water, and trafe the cooked water, and that cooked water gets mixed in with the rest of their waste stream, and now it's 5% of the waste stream in the factory. Okay, so and now someone went ahead and spray dried the whey cream or something like the whey that from the waste stream. They concentrated it and they dried it. Okay, so now if we say ChaNaN, then the thing we're talking about, the can of pork and beans, or the water or the waste stream is 100% treif. Okay, it's 100% treif. If we say it's only a 5 or 10% treif, then we have another cheshbon. Okay, and that's why I'm throwing this in. There's something called asli shamash b'shefa. If a kli only has a 5% bli of treif, any use that you can use for that kli afterwards, any bli will come out of there will be about the bashishim into the thing you're going to make afterwards. Okay, so then that's already a shayla. There the Machaber says if something's asli shamash b'shefa, you don't have to kasher it all together. Okay, we don't always do that, but there's what to think about. But when this ChaNaN says no, that can of pork and beans is 100% treif. It's not 10% or 7% treif. It's 100% treif. So then the bli is 100%, not 10%. Okay, so that's another case where ChaNaN would come into kasher in the situation. Okay, now I told you that the Ramah says is machmir for ChaNaN, except in certain cases. So I'm going to break that down. What I'm about to tell you is the way, as I understand it, the way the Pri Chadash breaks it down like this. He says like this. No, sorry, I don't want to try it. Sorry. Okay, so the first case is The case that the Rama is talking about that says that there is ChaNaN is Lach Yavesh. What does it mean, Lach Yavesh? So the simplest case for us of Lach Yavesh is you have bli in a kli. Rav Moshe brings from Mashach. The bli is considered as Lach, which makes sense to us. So we have bli in a kli, and on the belt that's treif, someone put cookies onto there. Okay, the company is baking cookies. Those cookies are considered to be our lach, the bli that's coming out as lach, into a solid piece, into the cookies that are running on there. That's the case where we say ChaNaN. Okay, then there are almost says, but if it's lach balach, then we only have to be choshesh. We are choshesh for ChaNaN also, unless it has some ruba. Okay, the first case where it's lach b'yavesh, we just flat out say that there's ChaNaN. But in the case where it's lach balach, then we say ChaNaN also. But the makom has ruba, then we're meko, which is most cases for us end up being cases of lach balach, but not always. And then the last case the Rama says is what happens is yavish b'yavish. He says if it's yavish b'yavish, then there's no ChaNaN at all. Okay.
Does
So
anybody say ChaNaN by Yavish B'yavish?
what do you say?
Does anybody say ChaNaN by Yavish B'yavish?
Yes, some do, but the Rama says we're not choshesh.
How does that time get into the?
Okay, so that's correct. But the question, I'm not sure why some, but the Rama says we're not machmir for it at all. Completely, the end of the Rama, it's way back a few screens ago. We're not machmir for it at all. So in case of Yavish, in the case of Yavish b'Yavish, now in the case of Yavish b'Yavish, there's a detail here. Okay, what you said, Yochanan, is the way Rebelsky explained it. I'm not sure if everyone said it that way, which is that the point of Yavish b'Yavish is there's no transfer of time from one to the other. Okay, they're just pieces. They're chatichas. Okay, in the case of lach balach, there's no chatichah. That's why there's possibly no ChaNaN because there's no chatichah nasas neveilah. But Yavish b'Yavish there are chatichas, but no time transfer to each other. So le'inyan, what happens if you have powders mixed together, like a stabilizer blend? Also, a stabilizer blend, okay, that you can use to make yogurt. So it's powders mixed together, and the stabilizer blend has gelatin in it, okay, and it's mixed with all kinds of other stuff, and that's all kosher. Okay, so do we say ChaNaN on that or not? So now, in other halachas, in other types of halachas, a mix of powders is considered to be lach balach. Okay, the powders, because the definition for most rules, what's Lach and Yavesh has to do with, is it distinct? Okay, can I pick one piece out from the other? So powders or not, powders are most assumed that powders are Lach balach because you can't pick out one piece of powder from the other piece. It's just one. It's a jumbo. It's all together. It's as if liquid.
Anytime you have Yavish, I mean, if chatichas get to a certain size, very small, also you'll have the same problem. I mean, it's very hard.
But when chatichas speak, right? So when they come up to be like a powder,
it's hard to put a specific to define exactly when it becomes a powder, and it'd be harder to distinguish.
That's wonderful. That's true. So we can think about that when we get to that kind of situation. But when we have a powder, when it looks at us, we know we're looking at it, right? When we're looking at cookies, we know those are Yavish. When we're looking at powders, we know it is. What's the exact line? We'll think about it differently. But in the case of a powder, in his stabilizer blend, where it's a powder, so for other halachas, that's considered lach balach. But for this halacha, it's not considered lach balach because for our purposes, what we care about is any time transferring from one to the other one. It's not just a mix of powders. Okay? In which case, so therefore he said is for the case of in the powder stabilizer blend, we'll see later next time other reasons to not say ChaNaN in that case. You also wouldn't say ChaNaN, which has to do with the yogurt that's made out of that blend. Okay, so the gelatin is not bottled in the blend, but then the blend is not bottled into the yogurt. But we don't have if we don't say ChaNaN, then the gelatin was bottled. Okay. We now move to a different kind of question, and that is like this. Prima Government says that since ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim is only drabanan, I've said that a dozen times. It's only a drabanan. He says so we could say Safek drabanan l'kula. Okay, we say Safek drabanan l'hakol. So, for example, if we had an ounce of Issur fell into 10 ounces of heter. Okay, so it's treif, and now that 10 ounces fell into a big vat full of other sticks, and the big vat, and there was for sure 60 ounces in that vat, but we don't know if there was 660 ounces. Okay, we know there was enough to be mevatel the original Neveilah in 10 times, but we don't know if there was enough to be mevatel the 10 ounces, the 11 ounces in shisha. Okay, so in that case, the Prima says so. Therefore, in that case, you say Safek drabanan l'kula, and don't be choshesh for ChaNaN. So without ChaNaN, it would be Batal B'Shishim, because the Neveilah is for sure Batal B'Shishim. But we don't know if the whole ChaNaN was Batal B'Shishim, so it's too late, it's spilled out, we can't tell anymore. So we say Safek Issur on the Kula, and you don't have to be Kashrus for ChaNaN in that case. Okay, you're allowed to eat whatever's left in the pot. This big vat has now 500 left. We don't. Was there 660? Was it not 660? So we say it's okay. It's mutter because maybe there was Safek Issur on the Kula, and you could eat. Okay, that's the case. Prima Gon says you could be made. That's a simple case. But the case that's more negated to us, a more complicated case, is what happens if it's a different kind of suffix, not a suffix that it got mixed in and we don't know if there was shisha or not. What happens if there's a machlokes haposkim, and in the machlokes haposkim we usually would be machmir on that shaila because Safek Issur l'chumra. It's a shaila of a deraisa, so we're machmir on a shaila. Okay, we take a strict position on something, but now it bangs into a situation of ChaNaN. Okay, now it bangs into a situation of ChaNaN. So should we say, well, we're machmir about the shaila. Usually we're machmir about the shaila, and now it banged into ChaNaN, which is a drabanan principle. The difference it's a shaila of the right, so we're machmir on that shaila. Open up your shulchan, it says to be machmir on that shaila. So now that it's ChaNaN, we should still be machmir. Or should we say that wait a second, we were only machmir originally because it was a shaila of the right. Now that it's only most a shaila of the rabbanan, because now it's just ChaNaN, so now we could be makel. Okay.
That'd be an example, right?
So to you, I'm about to say it sounds like, oh my God, it's like a real theoretical question. Like, who cares? I mean, it sounds like someone's just sitting at night, But for us, it's super negate, okay? And negate is the steam systems, okay? Which is we when you cook food in a kettle and it's being heated by steam, we say that we assume that tam goes through the walls of the kli and makes the condensate, the steam on the other side, makes it treif. Okay, and time goes back and forth between those. Okay, but we'll see, maybe even in a few times from now, when we get to there, that there's actually a machlokes rishonim whether time or not whether and how much time passes through a kli. So this that we're assuming, and you open up a Shulchan Aruch in Halacha, we're in Tzadi Beis. We open up to Halacha, it says that time goes through a kli, and we assume it goes all the way through and completely through. That's not muskim. That's not for sure. That's the way we practice. But it's a real machlokes about that. So we say, it might be making your food treif, so therefore the food might be treif, so you have to be machmir about that. So what would you say? What happens now if it's a shaila only of ChaNaN? Would we be machmir on that shaila also if it's a shaila of ChaNaN? So two ways that it comes.
And how would the ChaNaN would be the question? If the steam.
I'm going to tell you two ways that it can happen. One is we made the steam treif. Okay, they were making something treif in here, and the steam is treif. And now we've been flushing the water out. Okay, we've gotten out 70% of the water is out, and 30% of the water is still left behind. We haven't gotten rid of all the treif water yet. It takes time to get rid of the treif water. So we've gotten rid of most of the treif water, but we still have some left behind of treif water. So is the steam system now 100% treif, or is the steam system only 30% treif? Okay, meaning, should we say ChaNaN or not? We know there's 30% of the water floating in the steam system. 30% is still left behind from the original treif water. So is the steam system now 100% treif, or is the steam system only 30% treif? Okay, or another case, what happens if the food that we cook in these pots that we were cooking in here itself wasn't 100% treif? The food we were cooking was only 5% treif. So if the food is only 5% treif, then should we say that the steam is now 100% treif? Because we said ChaNaN on what they cooked, so 5% treif made the food actually 100% treif, and now it passes through and makes the steam treif also. Or should we say is no, the food is only 5% treif. For that ChaNaN, it was only 5% treif. So the water on the other side of the steam system is also only 5% treif.
Addition is lach balach, right?
Yeah, so lach balach is very relevant over here. But so should we say, should ChaNaN tell us that this that we usually machmir to say that time transfers through, that chumrah that we have, which will be machmir because of Safek Deraisa, that chumrah that we have to follow that shita, should we be machmir that when the question we face is only ChaNaN? Now, I have to tell you, I'm going to pause for a second just to tell you that the case I keep telling you is that we cook Neveilah, which happens. It's not such a common thing to happen in a company that they're cooking Neveilah, that we have to worry about a steam system. Usually what we worry about are things like milk or chol vacuum or gvinas akum. Those are the kinds of things that tend to be more likely in a plant. We're going to see next time, there might be reasons to not say ChaNaN on those b'chalav, okay? To not worry about ChaNaN for those kind of Issurim. So the example I'm using is Neveilah, because on Neveilah, those coolers are not going to apply, okay? Anyhow. What?
Gelatin is not that uncommon.
Right, so gelatin is also right. So gelatin also. So gelatin could be bottle. It has to be enough to be not Palta B'Shishim also. Okay, so but yes, gelatin could be also. Okay, so now you're gonna sort of have to believe me on this one. Okay, I'm not giving you this goes on for a whole page here, which I'm not going to tell you, and that is
Like I see it.
what? Yes. Okay. Good.
Bring it back.
Okay. I don't have to say everybody's name on live camera, Okay, but yes. Okay. So you're going to have to believe me that on this Shiloh, should we say Safek Issur L'Kula for these kind of cases when ChaNaN bangs into should we say ChaNaN by case like that? You're going to have to believe me if you want. After I can give you the whole thing to read. I see 5 shittas about this. Okay, you for now you have to believe me. Okay, there's 5 shittas. Some say like this. You could be mekel ChaNaN if there are still people in the Maisa who follow the Kula de Kashita. Okay, they're talking about a chaylev de bnei reinus. It's a certain chaylev that some people eat and some people don't eat. And the shayla should we say ChaNaN on that chaylev that some people eat this fat and some people don't eat the fat. That the din is we don't eat it. We are machmer on that shayla because they suffer it might be chaylev de raisa. We're machmer about that, but some people do eat it. So if some people are being mekel, then that's good enough to say that we don't say ChaNaN. Okay, that's what one sheet. That's one version of what the Marshal says. Okay, another version of the Marshal says is that. No, we'll make them no matter what. Make them if the whole reason to be machmer originally was just we'd be machmer for a shayla with the raisa, then when it only comes to ChaNaN, then you could be made. Okay, there's another version of the Marshal. Okay, a third one.
Is this only Lach B'chalav or even Lach and Yavesh?
I think only by Lach B'chalav. I don't remember. I'll have to look back at my notes. What? No, the question is should we be by Lach B'Yavesh, then we would not be mekel. Well, we would not be mekel. Right, correct.
Why should we Lach B'Lach?
So you missed. It was a few minutes ago. Okay,
He's asking if the Issur is told Machlokes HaPoskim, if it's Siruf that ChaNaN is a Shiloh, if you can be mekel. That's the topic. Okay. The law is not right.
No. So the point is that since ChaNaN is a drabanan, so we were originally machmer, let's say about chaylev de bnei reinus, we machmer about that only because it's shayla deraisa, but now it's only shayla drabanan. Okay.
It's machlokes.
Okay. So now another. This is the way the Taz says it. Is that we will be machmer. We're machmer for ChaNaN unless it comes out to it's very interesting. He says it the sheet of the. If I remember, it's about the chaylev b'nei reinus and ChaNaN are both Rabbeinu Ephraim in both of them. So he said we can't be machmer for we would be machmer for ChaNaN except if it's the same posek who was machmer on one thing and make on the other one. Then it does make sense to be machmer for that. I'm not sure why that makes so much sense. Why? I mean, it's not like we're asking him the shayla, But what if it's the same person, then we wouldn't have been machmer. Okay, that's a third sheet. That's a Taz. Rivka says it depends on whether the shaylas comes up together. Okay, if the 2 shaylas come together, then we say it's a shayla, it's a ChaNaN and this other shayla, then we're coming together. But if one was decided already, like the chaylev b'nei reinus, we decided it's us already, then we can't then say, but now it'd be mekel about ChaNaN afterwards. Okay, and I'm doing this really quickly. And the last one is from the Pri Megadim who says in almost every case it's a Safek Issur, and if it's a Safek Issur, then you could be mekel about ChaNaN. So l'inyanenu, okay, this is what I want to show you afterwards. L'inyanenu for a steam system, if you follow along what we're saying. We would be machmir for ChaNaN according to 3 of those shittas. According to 3 of those ways of looking at it, we would have to say ChaNaN. Meaning, does anyone follow the Mekilah? No, of course not. There's I'm sorry. Does anyone follow the Mekilah? No, nobody. No one's Mekel to say a Tam doesn't go through a Kli. No one in practice does that. Okay, or there's no inconsistency in the poskim, and the shilas don't come up at the same time because the Blias go through the Kli different than because they don't come up at the same time. On the other one, the second and the fifth would be Mekel, and we would say that there is no ChaNaN by a steam system. Okay. Now all of that.
What would be the inconsistency in 3?
Inconsistency. It would be machmer unless it's an inconsistency. Meaning unless it's if Rabbeinu Ephraim be machmer over here and be mekel over here, then we don't say that. But it's a okay. Now all of that is I can only use the word theoretical. Okay, because all of that is really what Price can talk about saying ChaNaN by Safek Issur, but. Rebelski and Shachta both said, no, it doesn't work like that. He says, over here, it doesn't make sense to be machmer for ChaNaN by a steam system. He says, it doesn't make sense. He says, first of all, ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim is itself as a chumrah. Okay, we know ChaNaN balach by Sha'ar Issurim is a chumrah. The Rama loves to tell you, if he tells you at the beginning of Teres Chatas, that whenever I say it's mutter makom hefsem ruva means maker, then I'm really making anyhow. Okay, so really it's balach it's mutter. He says, and over here also the other thing, which is the tipas chav, does the tam go through? We're machmer. The Shulchan Aruch says we should be machmer. That time goes through. In our kelim, no one sees any time going through. No one. A million times we've tasted things. No one ever saw time going through. So it's enough to be machmer in the case when it says, the actual case itself, to think time goes through. But to say ChaNaN in that kind of case also is already, that's too much to say ChaNaN. Okay, so in Lamaisa, that's what people do. They follow this idea that they don't worry about ChaNaN by steam systems. When we get to steam systems in a few times, we'll talk about how that comes out. Okay, but most people follow this. But they come on. Again, I give you 5 sheets over here and all kinds of things, and red and green boxes, all kinds of things. But they say, come on, to say ChaNaN over here, ChaNaN itself is a chumrah over here. It's ChaNaN balach, and to say that also on a steam system when no one ever saw any time going through, that's already too much. You don't have to mach. Okay. Okay. The last.
Also if you want to taste steam system, right? Don't have to taste
yes
the water. So let's say theoretically ChaNaN Issur, right? If you find enough bitrix or whatever. According to this,
if it's a child of ChaNaN only. If it's a sometimes yes or not. Yeah.
You have 1 gallon, it's Issur, yeah.
Okay. Fine. Okay, I hear that. Okay. Now the last thing to talk about is, which also when they get to industrial uses, is like this. ChaNaN says that the thing that we have, the Chatichah, is Nasas Neveilah. So the Yedias Hata'aroves says that's only true. We only say the Chatichah is Nasas Neveilah if the Chatichah was actually Nasas Neveilah, became a Neveilah, meaning there was what do you call it? So Yedias Hata'aroves. Somebody knew that the thing was made like this and it became Issur. He says, but if nobody finds out about this until the second bittul happens, meaning until we're at the point where the heter is now in a lot, the Issur is in a lot of heter, then there's no ChaNaN. Okay, ChaNaN is no, there's no such ChaNaN in that kind of case. ChaNaN only works if there's Yedias Hata'aroves. Some say it's like hey mamru. The whole ChaNaN Sha'ar Issurim is the Rabbanon. So he says only when the Chatichah is Nasas Neveilah, it's actually like declared to be a Neveilah. But if that didn't happen, then you don't have to worry about ChaNaN. Okay, now the Ramah, who says this? The Yedias Hata'aroves says this. Okay, the Ramah in Teres Chatas, the Ramah in Teres Chatas brings it down. Because Ramon Teres Chatas brings this down and says you need to have Yedias Hata'aroves. Okay, the Shach says, yeah, the Shach has a lot to say about this. And he says, you know why they're only said in Teres Chatas? He didn't say in Shulchan Aruch because he doesn't agree with it. He changed his mind. Okay, he was chayzer from it. He didn't really agree to this. That you need Yedias Hata'aroves. That's why it doesn't say this. Rabbi Krieger says, really? He brings rice in other places where the Ramah seems to say that you need Yedias Hata'aroves, not in Hilchos, not in Tzadi Beis, in other places. But then he says maybe didn't mean that. Anyhow, the Prim Gadol leaves it off that it's a Safek. Whether we need Yedias Hata'aroves. Some say b'makom hefsed you should be samech on this. The Minchas Yaakov says that if it's lach balach, then you can do it even Chatichah to be makel. If there's no Yedias Hata'aroves, there's a big to do on that part. Okay, do you need to have Yedias Hata'aroves? You don't have to have Yedias Hata'aroves. Okay, which of course is negate to us. Okay, because by us, when ChaNaN type things happen, there's nobody there. There's no yid there who knows what's happening. So Rabelsi said, the fact that we know that the way they make food in the factory is in this way, well, in case I told you before, and they're making Rice Krispie treats, we know what they do in the factory. Okay, we know the pork and beans, we know how they make it. Rabbi said that doesn't count the Yedias Hata'aroves. Really? That's what he said. And Rosh said, but the reason is because Yedias Hata'aroves means is somebody knows what's significant about this. So there are lots of people in the factory who know that they're cooking pork and beans. They're even watching it, being happy now, but to them it doesn't mean anything. He says,
and we know also what they're doing.
And we know also, right? Rabelsi said, we know also. He says, but we don't know about the can. We didn't make the Chatichah into an Neveilah. We just know. So Rosh said, I'm not sure. He said, I'm not really sure that counts. I mean, is it enough that I know? I know they're making. I mean, think about this. It means is that every time Mashiach visits, now we have a day worth of treif. Like yesterday it was mutter because he didn't come, but today he comes. He's going to visit less often. We'll tell him. So Rosh said like this. He said,
everybody RC thinks about that company. You should think about other companies.
We put in cameras right now. We're up the creek. We put in cameras right now. Okay, so he said like this. He said, Rosh said he's only being willing to be samech on this if the other tzirufim, of this roof, and there was some special reason why it was impossible to kasher these kelim. There was some reason why there was very difficult or impossible to kasher. He says, okay, then we could be samach on this. He says, but otherwise he wasn't so thrilled to say this. He was a little bit. He heard of such a thing, such a possibility. Again, remember the idea that you need Yedias Hata'aroves in itself is a machlokes. Not everyone agrees that you can even be samach on that Yedias Hata'aroves means anything. Okay, but if it does, to say that it means that this specific way of looking at it, that okay, we know they're making pork and beans. That's what they do. They sent us a schedule at the beginning of the week that says, Tuesday we're making pork and beans from this time. So he says, anyhow, he said, okay. He said in cases where you're really stuck and there's no other choices and there are other tzirufim, then he was willing to say that. Okay, anyhow, so that's it for today. In next time we're going to talk about exceptions. Today we only talked about what I think were the general rules of ChaNaN. Next time we'll deal with exceptions.
Yeah, I know. I'll give you the stump bells.